Thank you for this opportunity, and over the next 20 minutes or so, what I would be attempting to do is essentially summarize our work, Keral's work and my own work in the sphere of wetlands. So naturally it will be limited to Tamil Nadu, more specifically to Chennai, because I had absolutely no idea as to the diversity of the audience here. So I decided I would talk about something that I am very familiar with and share my experience. I've also taken the liberty of tweaking the title. I was given the title Wetlands and Water Management. Somehow off late, over the last 4 or 5 months, I've started hating this word management. It reeks of some kind of authoritarian attitude. So I decided I will substitute it with this word conservation, which also has a lot of problems, but still it's much better because it talks about the kind of roles that people could play in it and the active participation that is essential for protecting whatever we have left of nature in this beautiful country. One of the questions that I am often confounded with or often asked is whether I work on wetlands or water bodies. People say, madam, do you work on water bodies or do you work on wetlands? And it always puts me in a kind of a quandary because this is a very difficult question to ask. Seemingly very simple but extremely difficult to answer. Primarily because this term wetlands is a very generic term. It's a term that has been deliberately kept generic so that it can include all forms of aquatic systems. Water bodies more popularly is what we refer to man-made ponds and tanks. And it's a myth that Tamil Nadu has lakes. Tamil Nadu doesn't have lakes. Lakes are only north of India. So that's another kind of a planning fallacy that we always fall into. So man-made entities, water bodies, are a subcategory of wetlands. Wetlands is more generic and it includes everything from your mangroves to your mountain wetlands. All aquatic systems fall under the definition of wetlands. That is why I thought it's important that we highlight or we take a minute to look at what wetlands are, both technically as well as legally, how are they defined. They are highly variable and dynamic. That's one thing that we have to take into account. Very often that's where the biggest mistake is. We assume that only if a system is full of water, it's filled to the brim with water, it's a wetland or a water body. Otherwise it is not. It's very clear in the definition that anything that's very aquatic in nature, anything that is wet, in fact the Tamil word for it, the Eden level, is far more appropriate than this term wetland. Anything that's wet is actually a wetland. The paddy fields are also wetlands. They're dynamic, they're water bodies, but they also include land. This is an operative part that's often missed. So when you actually talk to people, when you talk to departments that are manning water bodies, wetlands, and you ask them, the wetland boundary enga, they will show you the bund and they will say, the land adjacent to the wetland is never considered as a wetland or as part of the wetland, which is a big mistake to make because these are as important or sometimes more important than the actual aquatic system. So wetland in ஒரு ஏரியாவை எடுத்தோம்னா தண்ணி நிக்கிற இடம், தேங்குற இடம், உள்ள ரீசார்ஜ் ஆகிற இடம், அது சுற்றி இருக்கக்கூடிய பஃபர் எல்லாம் சேர்ந்து தான் வெட்லேண்ட். ஒரு சிஸ்டம், அது ஒரு தொட்டி மாதிரி வீட்டில் இருக்கிற ஒரு பக்கெட் மாதிரி புரிஞ்சுட்டு அதுக்கான ஒரு ஒர்க் பண்ணுறது மிகப்பெரிய ஒரு துரோகம்னே சொல்கிறோம். அதுதான் நம்ம பண்ணிட்டு. ரெண்டாவது, they can be fresh water, brackish or saline. There is no rule saying only fresh water systems are wetland. In fact, if you take Chennai, you have all three of these, and that's what makes Chennai very unique. So wetlands includes brackish water systems, saline systems as well as fresh water systems, inland or coastal. It doesn't make a difference. Wetland, the definition encompasses aquatic habitats both in hinterland as well as in the coastal area, seasonal or permanent. This is another big loophole that everybody exploits. I mean, people are out there to exploit. They exploit it big time. The minute an area is dried out, and we are very good at drying out systems. Tamil Nadu actually has this great, unique talent of drying out aquatic systems. The first thing when encroachment, I mean that's a problematic word, but still I don't have a better word to use. When somebody decides to usurp the wetland, the first thing they do is cut out the inlet. அதுக்கப்புறம் they'll say தண்ணி வறண்டு போச்சு, இது wetland கிடையாது. And you'll have to stand there and defend saying no, it's a wetland, and they will say it's not a wetland. Very soon it will be reclassified as Porambok land or pasture land or whatever it is, and it's up for development. It can be both natural and man-made, although south of India, once again, natural wetlands are limited only to the coast. Inland, you don't have natural wetlands south of India. That's only up in the Himalayas in the north. static or flowing. So everything, every term that you could possibly think of fits this definition of wetland. That's the merit of it, and that's also the problem part of it. You cannot sort of very easily pinpoint that this is what a wetland is in terms of legal or management explanations. Then I thought I'll talk about Chennai a bit, Chennai's wetlands, because there's so much of talk on it, and I'm sure Niti is also going to elaborate a bit more on this. What is very interesting is what I heard from a historian friend of mine, most of you know him, Sriram, as to how the first tiff, war or whatever conflict that you wish to call, between the British and French in Chennai was over access to water. I believe initially the French had an upper hand by simply cutting off access to potable water to the British. And the British bounced back by establishing the first piped water supply in Madras Presidency. So it was essentially water that determined who is going to have an upper hand. And it continues to be so after so many decades. Even today, Chennai's growth, Chennai's development, Chennai's character is defined by water. And there's no moving away from that. Chennai is also a city which is known more for floods and droughts. Unfortunately, it's only after 2015 everybody has started talking about floods, as if it was happening for the first time. But historically, that's not very accurate. Chennai has always been a waterlogged city. Those days we would call it waterlogging, inundation. These days we call it flooding. It's simply a change in terminology. Primarily because these days every natural event has to be showcased as a natural disaster. I know I'm making a very strong negative kind of a comment, but that's the bitter truth of it. We've been working with a lot of communities in Chennai, in and around Chennai. And initially when this is for wetland restoration programs or conservation programs. Initially when we interact with them, they will say, "Ama area lam paadukakano, kolam paadukakano, naanga enga usire kudthurrom." All these very high funda, dramatic terms will be given. Finally, when you get into the design part of it, enna pannalam, unga oorla irukra edhukku enna pannalam. First thing they will say is, "Namba area la thanni varada paathukanga. நீங்களா ஆயக்கட்டில் தான்ப்பா வீடு கட்டியிருக்கீங்க, தண்ணி வரும். அதை பற்றி இல்லை மேடம், கால்வா போட்டுடலாம். நேராக கால்வா போட்டு they have the design worked out. All straight cut canals from the Erie, from the Kulam, straight to Buckingham Canal. As if Buckingham Canal is meant only to do this, they will say Buckingham Canalக்கு எடுத்துகிட்டு போயிடுங்க. அங்கேருந்து அது கடலுக்கு போயிடும். உங்களுக்கு நிலத்தடி தண்ணி போயிடுமே, அது அப்புறம் பார்த்துக்கலாம். எப்படியும் நாங்கள் இங்கேருந்து we don't take water, we'll ask for piped water. So we are working in a wetland in South Chennai, I don't want to name it. On the periphery of the wetland, the water supply is actually from 10 kilometers south of that place. Another wetland is being pumped and the water is being supplied. When you ask them, can't we do it here? Ingela vanda. Inge the water will go by tankers to other localities. So you are actually shifting water. Primarily because you don't recognize or there is a lack of willingness to invest your energy, not even resources, into protecting your water body. So the water keeps moving, along with it the energy keeps moving, and the pricing also keeps moving. And there's so much of hera-fairy going around in that it's virtually very difficult to arrive at some kind of a number. Droughts. Chennai has also been experiencing recurrent droughts, but what is very interesting is between two flooding events you have droughts. That's Chennai. Just take a look. We need not look into very early history. 2005. In fact, 2005 was a landmark flooding. More so, 2015 was mega floods, but 2005 was a landmark flooding because that was the first time, in addition to all those areas which are historically inundated, newer areas also got inundated. Until then, the pattern was very set. வெள்ளம் வந்ததுன்னா இந்த இடம் தான் வெள்ளம் வரும்னு இருந்தது. வேலைச்சேரி, மடிப்பாக்கம், பள்ளிக்கரணையில் வெள்ளம் வரும். பட் அப்போ எல்லா இடத்துலையும் வந்தது. 2015 சரி உங்களெல்லாம் எதுக்கு விட்டு வைக்கணும்னு பெரிய பெரிய இடங்களுக்கும் வந்தது. பட் 2005 floodல one of the things that was very clear was how we mismanaged the floods. I mean, Chennai floods are largely man-made, that's one thing. But the flooding ஆனப்புறம் how did we manage it ன்னு பார்த்தா, ஜேசிபிஸும் போர்க் லைன்ஸும் எடுத்துன்னு வந்து எல்லா இடமும் வெட்டி விட்டு தண்ணியை ஃப்ளஷ் பண்ண. Chennai is very good at flushing water, while the city is actually expected to drain water. Staggered or the water has to reach the sea. இங்கே அது கிடையாது, ஃப்ளஷ் மாதிரி அடிச்சு தள்ளிட்டு. Within a year we experienced one of the worst droughts. I'm sure all of you remember that. தண்ணி இல்லாத தவிச்சிட்டு இருந்தோம். So this has been the pattern. Chennai has experienced both floods and droughts, and it is in this context I think it's important to recognize that when you look at precipitation data, Since 2002, there has been a marked change in the precipitation of Chennai. We receive what are called intense rainfall days. Sila naal abdiye skies open up and pour. And the window is so short that avlo thanni varache and the thanniye taaki pidikkiradhukana system illa. Vandavane kadalla porudhu. And I was told by a researcher from IIT Madras that the sheet volume of water, the sheet flow of water, area channel mulimala, melindi varak thanni, has been consistently increasing for Chennai. The net volume of water that actually traverses through Chennai, west to east, north to south, south to east, has been increasing. All that water is going, I'm not saying we should trap all the water, that's also ecologically not very sensible to do, but the fact of the matter is we don't have systems that can handle water. Chennai is actually one of the 17 river basins of Tamil Nadu. It's a designated river basin. But river basin is designate pannadoda sari. We don't manage it as a river basin. We manage it as a city with an insatiable thirst for potable water. That is where most of the problems is, and it's the smallest river basin. It's a coastal city which is drained by its flat terrain. So this is something everybody knows, and you must be wondering why is this lady saying something which everybody knows. It's a coastal city. But there is an operative part to it. It's a coastal city lying adjacent to a very warm ocean. The Bay of Bengal, in comparison to the Indian Ocean or Arabian Sea, is a warm ocean. All our waters drain into it. So the kind of vulnerability that the city is exposed to because of the coast being very fragile is very high. In fact, what defines Chennai is the coast, not so much the hinterland. I keep speculating on this very often, and when people celebrate the rivers, once again a problematic statement, but let me go ahead and make it. Chennai needs to be celebrated for the coast, not so much for the rivers. The rivers are just glorified surplus coast channels, that's about it. Chennai is a coastal city, and all the wetlands that you find in Chennai are coastal. In fact, your groundwater aquifer, the most robust one, is along the coast. Everything about Chennai is coast, and the coast is not limited to 500 meters from the high tide line. Thanks to CRZ, the minute you ask for coast na 500 meter high tide line. Chennai பொறுத்தவரைக்கும் 15 kilometers hinterland, it's still a coast. Who tells you this? The plants and animals tell us that, and they don't lie. Normally plants and animals don't lie, they'll speak the truth. So 15 kilometers hinterland from the coast, from the high tide line, Chennai is still very coastal. It's a flat area. The wetlands therein have to be managed as coastal wetlands. Whether they are in some place in Annanagar or whether they are along the coast, it needs to be managed as a coastal wetland. There are rivers of various typologies. One of the things that very often we hear is Chennai is drained by 4 rivers. Everybody says, Aranyar, Kosastaliyar, Kuam and Adyar. All a homogeneous entity, and the plans are also the same. You have a walking pathway, a cycling track, some greening, and you believe that you restored the river. Fact of the matter is, each of these rivers is very distinct and highly human manipulated. One more thing about Chennai's wetlands is the way they are organized. It's highly human manipulated, human influenced. I'm not using the word manipulation in a negative sense. The fact of the matter is they are all connected up. There's no entity, wetland entity in Chennai which is in isolation. Everything is connected to everything else. Adilladaki, what we do is we believe that we can have a single template and happily go around restoring this place. That's why you find that despite so much of effort, your rivers are not really certainly restored. They are only cleaned. And the cleaning is also a temporary kind of an initiative, but that's what's happening. Restoration is the kadeve kadeva. So the next question that we keep asking is, at least I keep asking often, in the last 20 years I've been asking this, wetlands, water bodies, reservoirs, evvula dhaan irukku Chennai? You ask this question to anybody who's working on wetlands in Chennai, each one of us will give you one number. Some of us will give you a very conservative estimate of 425 wetland complexes. There are others who will tell you 30,000. So in the kind of range is very surreal, not normal at all. You can diverse a bit like 100 to 150 or 200 to 250. But from 425 to 30,000 is quite a steep kind of increase. Nobody knows how many wetlands are there in Chennai. That's something that I can say with fair amount of confidence. Second thing, how are they organized? They don't, as I said, they don't exist in isolation. They're all organized. I've been speculating, I don't have data for that in the hinterland, in areas close to the western periphery of the city, They are organized as satellite complexes. There is a mega wetland buffered by a number of small wetlands. A good example of this will be from Maduranthakam. I'm sure Maduranthakam ellarkum theriyum illaya? Yes or no? நீங்க கேக்குறீங்களா இல்லையான்னு டெஸ்ட் பண்றதுக்கு தான் அந்த கேள்வி. மதுராந்தகம் எல்லாரும் ஏரி காத்த ராமர் கோவில்னு சொல்லுவாங்க, அங்க பெரிய ஏரி இருக்கு. Fact of the matter is Maduranthakam is a mega area buffered by a number of small areas. In fact, the existence of Vedantangal to a large extent depends on Maduranthakam. So அந்த மாதிரி organized. But when you come close to the coast, they are organized as cascading systems. The much celebrated Pallikarnai Marsh and its buffering wetlands, the wetlands that surround the Pallikarnai Marsh, are good examples of cascading systems. In fact, numbers keep thrown up about how many wetlands are there around Pallikarnai. The most often cited one is 32. The fact of the matter is there are 65. So something as rudimentary as that, Pallikarnai kulla ethana eri vadiyadunale number correct ah theriyadu namakku. Ishtathukku solluvom 32 nu 35 nu namakku edhu pidichirukko adu solluvom. Actually on ground truthing pannittu then when we do a GIS analysis we find there are 65 wetlands. But what is even more interesting is this number is increasing because suddenly we have decided that we will have to flood proof Chennai, and the only way we can do that is by restoring wetlands. So ella wetland ella thodiyum connect panni vittu. Yesterday I heard from somebody who works on an area called Selayur. I believe there used to be 2 outlets to the Selayur wetland. Sorry, no, it can be there. There used to be 2 outlets to the Selayur wetland, one going through a place called Thirumanjeri, the other going through a place called Chitlapakam. The outlet to Thirumanjeri has been closed. I don't have a better word for it. Fact of the matter is it's been closed. So all the surplus water actually drains into Chitlapakam, rendering that place further vulnerable to floods. So this is how we've been managing wetlands, connecting up everything, and so we are not very sure about the number. Yet another problem with this connecting up is very often it's connected up against the gradient. Where water is expected to actually flow out, we create an inlet out of it. Where water is supposed to be stored, we create a flood regulator. So in all, it's a lot of engineering, very high sounding engineering with a lot of numbers thrown around. But the fact of the matter is it's in a mess. I'm sorry Am I making sense or am I speaking too fast? Okay. But even if I don't make sense, you'll have to listen to me for the next few minutes. What? I had just one more point to make on this particular slide. Why did I put this word reservoirs here? We are all aware of the number of reservoirs that Chennai has and the new ones that are coming up in Kannankotai and in Orattur and stuff like that. Many more are in the anvil. Now, one of the things that we looked at is how exactly have these wetlands changed over the last 30 years, including reservoirs. And lo and behold, the only wetlands which have not changed in terms of area, boundary, character are the reservoirs. Every other wetland in Chennai has been manipulated for some reason or the other. In some places, the wetland itself has disappeared. It's like that Vadivelu story where he goes around looking for the well, Like that you look for the wetland because Chennai Corporation asked us to restore 200 wetlands. Half of them were not even present, Instead, we had schools, institutions, hospitals, temples, everything that you can think of were located in a place where a wetland was supposed to be. In other instances, they have been fragmented for road laying, some instances fragmented for establishing bus stations, somewhere police stations. Everything that you can think of, we have messed up. The only places where this has not happened is the reservoirs. So the last remaining intact wetlands for Tamil Nadu, for Chennai, are the reservoirs. Then of course, we are very good at groundwater abstraction, and that has a big bearing on wetland because very often we abstract groundwater for commercial purposes, either within a wetland or outside the wetland, immediate periphery of the wetland. And very often this is in a very grey area. These trucks that you see, nobody knows who's got the license, what kind of license do they have, do they actually have license to ferry water or abstract water? None of it is known. But the minute you clamp down on them, this happened a few years ago, all of them go on strike and the city is brought to its knees. So they are virtually holding us to ransom. The truck drivers are the ones who are determining whether we should have water or not and what quality of water we should be having. In a place where we are working in South Chennai called Sembakam, if you go to that lake, you will find that it's always full. It looks blue. There are lots of birds. So immediate conclusion would be it's a beautiful place. But data shows, our research shows that that place receives something close to 12 to 16 MLD of sewage every day. So the wetland is filled with water, and that water gets abstracted and sold. So when fish from that wetland is caught and it's exported. So I asked that fisherman, என்னங்க இவ்வளோ அழுக்க தண்ணி இருக்குது, இந்த தண்ணியிலேருந்து மீன் எடுத்து கொடுக்குறீங்க. மேடம் நம்ம சாப்பிடல மேடம், இது கேரளா போகுது. ஸோ கேரளா போனால் பரவாயில்ல. This is his defense. What do you say? I mean, I couldn't go on with the conversation saying Kerala pona parvalya, and I was worried he'll push me into the wetland. So I told him, "Sir, report on Kerala poto," and I walked away. So this is how we defend ourselves, or we reason out, against all that we are doing. And then there are, of course, invisible aquifers, invisible only to you and I and to the line departments which are manning it. But guys who are abstracting it, they seem to have a very good understanding of where these invisible aquifers are. We restored a wetland called Thalambur, which is once again in South Chennai, beautiful place, it's still continuing to do well. A whole lot of people came to thank me one day with a nice towel, a pink colored towel, and they wanted to put a towel around me. I thought, okay, I badly need a towel, let me take it. I stood there and I asked them, எதுக்கு கொடுக்குறீங்க இந்த பாராட்? They said, உங்கள் தயவில் நாங்கள் இங்கே இந்த அக்விஃபர்லேருந்து தண்ணி எடுத்துட்டு இருக்கோம். நான் என்னையா பண்ணேன், நான் சொல்லவே இல்லையே. I was like taken aback, and then I went to that place. Very beautifully they have mapped the aquifer there. They are all erstwhile mango orchards. That's where water is being abstracted. And they said, we are supplying it to this institution, that institution. I mean, they gave a list. When I asked the PWD whether they have the data, they said, no, it's with the groundwater department. So these invisible aquifers also determine our wetland. Then, of course, we have the issue of water risk. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is when it pertains to water, the risk part of it has not been focused upon at all. And the minute we talk of risk, we assume that exposure to floods is the only risk that is connected to water. More importantly, the kind of differentiated response that we as a city, we as a human race have to risks, something that has not been looked into at all. Flood vanda ellarkum flood illa, ellarkum flood kadiyadu. Drought vanda ellarkum drought aduvum kadiyadu. There is a differentiated response, differentiated impact that needs to be looked into, and that's something we have very badly failed to do so. And that is what is contributing to wetland conservation being mismanaged. Because to us, some of us who are very privileged, wetland conservation is having a jogging track around the bund, having a cycling path around the bund, having an amphitheater. This is wetland restoration. Your wetland is restored and you are very happy. But the minute you say, no, I'm not going to do any of that, we're going to have an earthen dam, we're going to allow water to percolate, it's of no use to us. And this place will be flooded, so we don't want it. So this is what we are alienating. In fact, the kind of elitism has crept into wetland conservation in Chennai. Those who are very articulate, I put myself also in that category. Those who are privileged, we determine how wetland conservation should be done in the city. And that is to the neglect of local communities, and more importantly, the local flora and fauna. In the wetland, supposedly restored wetland, Chennai la poi parunga, oru native plant kuda irukadu. Native tree irukum. என்ன ட்ரீ எடுத்துன்னு வந்து நட்டுடுவோம். எங்கே இருந்தாலும் காஞ்சிபுரத்தில் நிறைய இடங்களில் இது பண்ணி எடுத்துகிட்டு வந்துடலாம். அப்படியே கிரவுண்டோட 25 அடி மரத்தை பேத்து எடுத்துகிட்டு வந்து வச்சிடலாம். ட்ரீ இருக்கும், லோவர் பிளான்ஸ் இருக்காது, நேட்டிவ் ஃபானா இருக்காது, பேர்ட்ஸ் இருக்கும். பட் பேர்ட்ஸ் இருக்கிற வேலைக்கு பிஃபோர் வி ரெஸ்டோர்ட் there were 2 birds, crows and sparrows. After we restored there are 10 speciesன்னு முடிச்சிடறோம். In fact, I heard a presentation by PWD. I mean, I'm eternally grateful to them. I'm deeply in love with the department, but still let me say this. Pre-restoration, post-restoration impact. Birds arrived, birds coming in post-restoration. Snakes coming, birds coming in. Enge in the coming, edukku coming. I mean, this is how the wetland is being monitored. So that's one point that we need to focus upon going forward. Scarcity, once again, we understand as something that's limited to droughts, but we heard Dr. Sarah Ahmed. Scarcity can also be when there is too much of water. It's an issue of access and equity. That's something that's solely missing and not at all thought about when it comes to wetland conservation in Chennai. We assume that only when there is drought we need to supply water through tankers, and with that it's over. Restoring wetlands to a quality where the neighborhood can draw water from that wetland, make it a kind of an in situ secure system, is something that has not crept into our understanding. We still talk about restoring wetlands for an agenda that's very, very elitist. I'm certainly not against walking tracks and jogging tracks and all, but that's something that comes in very at the fag end. For the city to become resilient, I think the restoration of the wetland should be for the sake of the wetland and for its original ecosystem services, not for something that you and I are going to impose upon. So some of the things that are very unusual and perplexing, it's here that I'll have to make a confession. Even after living in Chennai for 30 odd years, I still pride myself of being a person from Andhra Pradesh. So to me, Chennai is a very fascinating city and some unusual patterns as well. One of the things that's very unusual is, even if you are living on the periphery of a wetland, you don't use surface water. In Chennai, that never happens. I keep wondering why. What stops you from taking a kodam or a bucket to the nearest water body and pick a pail of water? I've never seen any Chennai do that. Second thing is this misuse of water, All of us have this habit. I mean, at least I see that in my neighborhood. Oru naal thanni vecha adu kottidno, alukaidu. Early in the morning, if you see, buckets and pails of water will be emptied onto the road. Because people say it's been kept for one day, so the water is clear. And water reporter, alambi. There's so much of consumption of water, wasteful water, that I still find it very difficult to reconcile. Then, of course, you have these informal water markets that I spoke about, and these are the ones that are actually destroying whatever little wetlands we have. A few years ago, about 8-9 years ago, we did a study of the area South Chennai, once again South Chennai, around Pallikarnai Marsh, and we found 900 tankers were being extracted even during the monsoon, per day. 900 tankers. And all these from erstwhile agriculture wells. This is what we've been doing. I recognize the fact that Chennai has also had some pioneering initiatives, rainwater harvesting, recycling, watering and all that. But what dent have they made to the system, what dent have they made to wetland conservation is something nobody has studied, and I think that's a grey area that needs to be looked into. Oh, sorry. And that was my last slide. Thank you. I hope I stuck to time.
Yes, thank you very
Thanks.
much. Dr. Venkatesan has to leave immediately after this. Are there any questions? She'll be happy to answer. Or Dr. Venkatesan, can I share your email in case any of you would like to reach out to her for any further information or any queries that you may have? You just come to me and I'll be happy to share the information to you.